and welcome to another episode of the TA Table, the official podcast of the TATP, the Teaching Assistants Training Program at the University of Toronto. My name's Elliot Fonarev, and I have with me my co-host Estefania Toledo.
In this episode, Elliot brings us a conversation he had with Dr. Robert Bentley, who's an assistant professor in the Faculty of Kinesiology and Physical Education here at U of T.
It was great talking to Robert because he's really embraced incorporating generative AI into his course design and his classes, and he's thought a lot about it. Let's have him introduce himself.
Hi, my name is Robert Bentley. I'm a cardiovascular physiologist and an assistant professor in the Faculty of Kinesiology and Physical Education. I teach cardiorespiratory physiology courses, cardiovascular physiology courses, as well as exercise training physiology-based courses.
And I'll start by asking him how he fits AI into his broader teaching approach.
When it comes to course design, obviously each instructor is going to have a different approach, a different philosophy. I try and foster genuine curiosity through openness and trust. I really want to allow students to be able to learn from their previous mistakes, but importantly as well, scaffold students towards content mastery. And AI, I think, is an excellent resource for expanding their education. If we're speaking about scaffolding students towards content mastery, GenAI may provide a blueprint or a snapshot which you can build upon towards developing your understanding. If we're speaking about learning from previous mistakes, if we're critiquing Gen's AI response, we're learning from a quote-unquote mistake, and maybe we're improving upon that information to make it more appropriate or to make it more discipline-specific. And then I think with also the idea of openness and trust, I'm telling students, being a bit vulnerable, I'm not an expert, but I think it's important for you to understand how this works. So we're going to learn a bit together. I'm going to hopefully provide you with some exposure to a technology that allows you to make informed decisions later, but also gives you a skill set to use this technology in the future. In addition, I think it's important to also focus on some transferable skills as well. That's a big element for me. Take information you've learned in class, but apply it elsewhere. And with that in mind, I think it's important from my perspective to utilize some of this new emerging technology, one being GenAI, as far as creating a transferable skill. So I think for me personally, it naturally aligns with my philosophy. And I think I'm equipping students with a worthwhile skill set. So with that, we have to ensure access to these applications or technologies for all of our students. I often do utilize open source formats. ChatGPT is one of them. Of course, there are paid versions of that, but there's also freely accessible ones as well. And then Microsoft Copilot is a software version that is licensed by the university. So I largely focus on the use of GenAI open sources with Microsoft Copilot coming to the forefront as well for those reasons. I think designing courses, number one, is quite challenging. I think designing them and adjusting them as new technology emerges is important. And as I teach upper year courses, third year, fourth year, as well as graduate level courses, I'm scaffolding in different elements of AI. So GenAI is one element that I often utilize in my third year course. It's an upper year physiology course, and they're encouraged to utilize either ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot. And what the students do is they complete some sort of laboratory experiment. Following their experiment, they have to complete a laboratory report, including a discussion, much like in scientific journals that are field specific to our discipline. And with that discussion, there's some guided questions. And one of those guided questions specifically requests the use of this GenAI, and it gives them an exact prompt. I'm quite clear as to how I want them to prompt the AI. And I want them to explain some sort of physiological process we cover in lab. They learn and they experiment with it, and I want them to ask AI what the answer might be to a question. After they provide the response, I then give them a journal article that actually has the answer in it. I tell them to go to page, whatever it might be, paragraph here, have a look. Let's now correct the Gen AI's response to make it a bit more appropriate based off the knowledge you now have from the lab, but also in the article I've given you. And in doing that, I think it's worked okay. Some students really embrace this checking of AI and information literacy, ensuring it's accurate. Some students maybe not quite as much, but I think an overarching high-level piece of feedback from the class, and I've obtained some of this through discussions with students and some informal polls in class, is that they were surprised at the responses. They've heard about GenAI in the social media and in different contexts. And in the application we had, they were surprised at almost the superficial level of information that was provided, as opposed to the more the specific detailed responses you might get as a quote unquote expert after you've learned that material. So I think that's been enlightening. And I would say it's worked well because it's opened up the students' eyes, at least saying that when I'm working with AI or Gen AI, the responses I get may not be exactly perfect. And it's my job to fact check that and also modify as needed to ensure it's accurate for whatever that application might be. In a fourth year course, I incorporate some literature curation AI as well, helping them understand where to find literature, where sources may come from. And in my graduate course, I incorporate those two preceding examples, but also NAI centralized around determining a consensus on a topic. So helping them understand what literature might support or what it might not, as far as creating a general understanding of what the field suggests a consensus might be on a topic. So in all of my courses, I'm slowly working it in, again, keeping in mind developing transferable skills they can take with them outside of the classroom onto that next step. So it's woven in, I think, relatively well into my classes right now, but I'm always reviewing, I'm always adjusting, and I'm just trying to get the students exposed to it so they can appreciate some strengths and weaknesses, but also begin to develop competency with some new technology that's emerging.
What Robert highlighted there is how he is helping students not only find uses for language models as a learning tool or learning aid, but also sharpen their critical engagement with the information content that this technology is spitting out as they interact with it. And that gets to the heart of something that a lot of educators are grappling with. How are we to guide our students to use this tool in a way that maintains our learning objectives, academic integrity, and teaching philosophies? What are the parameters that we put on its use for our students and for ourselves? So Robert had some thoughts about that.
I think with each instructor, with each course, there's a pedagogy that's going to help facilitate content mastery for the students, and everyone has their own approach and decisions that they make surrounding that. From my perspective, I see it just as a tool to help facilitate learning, and you have to be upfront. If some courses are saying that students are not permitted to use AI, that was a purposeful decision by the instructor, likely rooted in best practice, and that should be followed and adhered to. In other courses where they're saying you can use AI for these learning outcomes or objectives or transferable skills, that's important too, and it should be followed as well. In those situations where they're telling you or providing information on how to use it, that's transparency centralized around the application for that course. And in my courses, I am upfront from the beginning. My course outline tells explicitly when we're going to be using GenAI, how we're going to be using it, and the fact that I encourage the use, but only as I'm outlining it. And then as we begin to have more conversation in the class, I start to explain more of my rationale for why we're applying it in a certain way. And I center it around that I understand that we aren't all experts. I also state up front that readily I am not an expert. I've done some work and I've gained some comfort and exposure to the technology, but I think we're all learning together. And importantly, I want to expose you towards this technology so you can learn as well. So to help you learn, I want to give you some parameters so you can begin to acquire comfort with it or competency or understand when it works or maybe when it doesn't. So you can then make an informed decision in the future to apply it correctly or to have the outcome that is beneficial in whatever that context might be. So I am quite upfront about it. I'm quite frank. I like to build a strong rapport with the class. I think in doing so, it eliminates some of those concerns around AI use when it's not to be used because I clearly outline when it should be. And I frame it as we're going to start to get comfortable so we can understand how to use it effectively. Really important consideration when you're thinking about designing your courses and thinking about designing your assessments as well is that what if some students choose to opt out of it? And then how do you appropriately grade or do you scale the grade to account for this where some may have had an external aid as a starting point, whereas others do not? In the cases that I'm having right now, and this will change in the future, but as of right now, the technology is still, I think, relatively new. And a lot of students haven't yet had enough exposure, I think, to make an informed decision about whether to use it or not. So in that context, it's actually built into my assessments right now that the students actually do need to use it because I want them to begin to acquire exposure to it. That will allow them in the future to make informed decisions about opting in or opting out based off of their own perceived strengths or limitations of the technology. But as of right now, it's woven into my course outline. It's woven into my assessments as we're going to be using this and we're going to be learning about it. I also weave it into my lectures as well, that we have open conversations conversations about it as the course progresses. How did you find the tool worked? Was it as expected? Was it not as expected? For those of you who it went a little bit better, what were some of your strategies that you used with it? And that can then help everyone learn more about it as a whole group. And conversely, students have to upfront state when they used AI. I think instructors should as well. So if you have content that was AI assisted, that should be transparent as well. You should show the students how it's being utilized. In my case, for the kind of courses that I teach, upper year physiology courses, without going into too much detail as to how a lecture or discussion might look, a lot of them though are really governed around, let's say, a model or maybe an image. And then I openly discuss those images or pictures or models. Utilizing a GenAI to help assist with that, like lecture content, it hasn't been beneficial for me at all, to be honest. I have tried it and it didn't capture any of the information that I wanted to. So I haven't used it on the back end. That being said, I do know of some individuals across various institutions where they do use some slide generation AI. And it does do a decent job if it's providing slides to a text document, let's say. It can do a pretty good job of pulling out important information, creating nice, accessible slides for students. But from my perspective, for physiology courses and model discussion, I haven't found that it does a very good job at all, and I haven't actually used it on the back end for that purpose. But if I did, and if others are, I think it's important to clearly highlight to your students when it is being used so they understand where that information is coming from.
Robert emphasized that transparency is key, being explicit with students about not just how, but also why they're being asked to use or not use an LLM in the classroom and how we are using it as educators. Next, I wanted to know how students are responding to Robert's classroom strategies. Let's hear more from Robert.
Yeah, I think interestingly in the courses that I have, because I'm so proactive in embedding them into my courses, I think students are more asking questions about skill development. Students want to know, how do I prompt the AI better? If I get a response that I'm not really expecting, how do I provide corrective oversight to the model to get information that I want? Those are common questions that I see. I think a part that sometimes students express concern with is maybe an inadvertent academic misconduct situation arising, where they weren't really aware that they were maybe going against policy, but perhaps they did. There's so many different AIs out there and different resources that are available, some concern centralized around that. And I often state that as long as you're upfront and transparent, if you have a question or a concern, you can always ask the instructor, or you could ask a TA beforehand what that utilization might be, or how do you cite utilization of this AI to prevent any issues from occurring. And I encourage students to take that route just to mitigate some of those concerns. But I think a lot right now, that as we're learning more about it, as students are gaining more exposure to it, a lot of it is just genuine curiosity. How do I use this resource effectively? And from my perspective, how can students use it to increase efficiency as well?
Also, I asked him how TAs can have more effective conversations with course instructors about using language models.
With the TAs of my courses, I do have those conversations early. And I also encourage them to follow the resources that I'm giving to students in the course and try the AI models out for yourself beforehand. Play around with them, try and utilize them, prompt them, ask them questions, interact with them, see how they're working. And that might allow you to be in a better position to respond to student questions, but also understand the work that you're seeing and also understand potentially the critique or the iteration of the response as students provide corrective oversight to it in their submissions. So I think just having conversations about it is always, I think, going to be welcomed. And I would encourage that. It just creates transparency for all parties involved. Instructors understand the TA's perspective. TAs understands the instructor's approach. And I think it levels the playing field and makes sure everyone's on the same level of understanding about how it's going to be used. And importantly, that any misconceptions can be rectified early on as opposed to later, which then might create some concerns. But I think for all TAs, just ask questions. If you have any concerns, ask a question. If you're unsure as to how it's going to be utilized or how it works, ask a question. And the instructors are always there to provide, I think, assistance and help.
Finally, I asked Robert for his tips for educators using AI and to share his final thoughts on the topic.
I think my biggest tip for educators, and I'm not saying that everyone has to include GenAI or AI in their courses. That is up to the instructor and what is the best approach for facilitating content comprehension for the students. But my suggestion, if people are interested in it, is just to start somewhere. And you can play around with various models, maybe in your office or at home. you can start to begin to acquire some exposure to it. And when you introduce it to the class, you can also introduce it from that perspective as well. As you can say, we're going to begin to have some exposure towards this technology. It's not to say they're going to be experts by the end of it. It's not to say that you're going to give them competency in one technology over the other, but it's a way of beginning that exposure, beginning the learning process. And I think importantly, framing the idea of information literacy, which I think is really important today's day and age. Are you checking that information to help ensure it's accurate? So it could be a news article from a news source, or it could be a post on social media, or it could even be information learning in class, right? Where is it coming from? And are you able to replicate that information somewhere else to help you have more confidence in the piece of information you're reading or using? It's particularly important as there are ways to almost generate information or knowledge or images. So being able or being aware that sometimes you have to make sure it's correct before you share the information or before you base informed decisions off of it. And I think to students in my courses, I always recommend that they acquire that skill, which is to sift through information, think critically about it, also check it to help ensure that they're making appropriate decisions based off knowledge that they have at the time. To really help them understand where it excels and maybe where it's not quite so great. So that in the future, they aren't learning that in real time. And when I give students an article with the answer and say, can you fact check this response? They say, oh yeah, now I can see where the AI may have been mistaken, maybe where it said something more general where it shouldn't have, and maybe where it had a misconnection. And they're applying that correction then almost in real time as they provide that oversight, and then they submit that response as part of their assignment. We're in higher education to help facilitate student learning. And if there's resources that I can incorporate to enhance that experience, I want to make sure I'm informed enough to make those decisions to include it or not. So I want to keep having these conversations so we can keep providing an excellent learning environment for the students, a constructive learning space that I think utilizes some of the newest technology appropriately for the outcomes of the courses. So big picture, I just want these conversations to continue. I think they've been great so far. I'm looking forward to where they go because I really want to create a great educational product for the students.
So that's my interview with Robert. I hope you enjoyed it. I want to thank him again for sitting down with me.
What a great way to end this episode. And I hope our listeners are inspired listening to some of those strategies on how to engage students into critically thinking about GenAI tools and their outputs.
Definitely, and we'd love to hear what you think. And we have a few more conversations for you this season, so please keep tuning in for more episodes of the TA Table.
Thanks, Elliot, and thanks everyone for tuning in. Until next time.
Bye.
Bye.